That night, the Atlantic Ocean was strangely calm. No strong winds, no raging waves. Only the dark surface of the sea, stretching endlessly like a cold mirror reflecting the fate of the people standing on the deck of the Titanic. John Jacob Astor IV stood there, alone, wearing the elegant coat of the upper class, aboard the ship praised as the greatest marvel humanity had ever created. He was one of the richest men in America, a name synonymous with power, wealth, and untouchable status. All his life, Astor had been accustomed to controlling everything, from the towering buildings of New York to vast investments, to his place within America's high society. But at this moment, on the deck in the middle of the boundless ocean, for the first time in his life, there was something he could not control. Astor looked out at the sea. His eyes were not filled with panic. There was no pleading, only a quiet, deep gaze profoundly human. Behind him lay luxury. The electric lights were still glowing. Music still drifted from the first-class lounges. The wealthy still believed they were in the safest place in the world. Before him lay darkness, an ocean that did not care who you were, did not care how rich you were, did not care how vast an empire you had built. In that moment, John Jacob Astor IV was no longer a symbol of wealth. He was simply a man, a husband worried for his young, pregnant wife, a human being standing on the fragile line between life and death. America had once admired the Astor family, had seen them as the embodiment of the American dream, that if you were smart enough, ambitious enough, lucky enough, you could reach the very top of the world. But Titanic posed a different question. When everything collapses, what does money truly mean? Does power still matter? And can fame save a human life? John Jacob Astor IV stood still. He did not run. He did not push or fight his way forward. He simply faced the fate drawing closer with every passing minute. That moment was never captured on film. No photograph preserves the exact look in his eyes. But history remembers. It remembers that aboard the ship, once believed to be unsinkable, one of the richest men in America came to understand something he had never had to face in his entire life. That there are things even money cannot command. And from the deck of the Titanic, the story of John Jacob Astor IV became more than a story of wealth. It became a profound question for America, about the price of glory, about the limits of power, and about the true human being behind great empires. John Jacob Astor IV was born into a world that most Americans could only gaze at from a distance. From the very moment of his birth, he carried a name that did not belong to an individual, but to an entire dynasty. The Astor family was not merely wealthy. They were a symbol, a class that shaped the economic and social face of the United States for generations. Buildings bearing the Astor name rose across New York like silent declarations of power. Lavish parties, political connections, and economic decisions, both great and small, all bore the imprint of that family. And within that world, John Jacob Astor IV grew up. His childhood lacked nothing in material terms. Yet it was filled with invisible pressure, the pressure of expectation, the pressure of having to become someone worthy of the name he carried. From an early age, Astor understood that his life was not entirely his own. Every action was scrutinized, every choice measured against those who came before him. He was not allowed to be weak. He was not allowed to fail. Astor's education was designed to produce an heir, not an ordinary child. Prestigious schools, the finest tutors, long days of study governed by strict schedules. He was taught to think like a manager, to see the world through the lens of assets, power, and influence. Personal emotion was not something to be openly encouraged. In large rooms filled with books and warm yellow light, Astor learned how to remain silent, how to observe, how to keep his thoughts locked inside. His family believed this was the best way to protect an heir. But for a boy, that wealth sometimes became a distance from ordinary children, a distance from a carefree childhood he would never know. Astor grew up amid social rituals and elegant gatherings where people spoke politely while weighing every word. There, he learned early that power did not come only from money, but from the ability to control image and emotion. The pressure of inheritance was never spoken aloud. It lived in the eyes of adults, in the stories told about ancestors, in the way everyone waited for him to grow into his role. John Jacob Astor IV was never asked who he wanted to become. That question never existed. The only assumption was that he would continue the path of his family, and within that silence, a character slowly took shape. Not loud, not expressive, but deep and full of inner strength. Astor learned to suppress emotion, to endure loneliness even while surrounded by servants and glowing lights. He became a man who observed the world from a safe distance, rather than immersing himself in it. That childhood did not create a rebel. It created a disciplined man, cautious, and always aware that every step he took would leave a mark on family history. From that foundation, John Jacob Astor IV entered life carrying a singular burden: absolute wealth, and an invisible weight that no amount of money could ever remove. This was the beginning of a life that appeared perfect, but it was also the place where deep hidden conflicts were first planted, between the man and the symbol, between personal freedom and a destiny already written. And from here, the true journey of John Jacob Astor IV truly began. When John Jacob Astor IV stepped out of his years of sheltered education, the world before him was no longer made of book pages or abstract expectations. It was an America in transformation, a nation entering the industrial age, where wealth was not only inherited, but tested every day in a ruthless marketplace. Astor understood one thing clearly: a family name could open the first door, but it could not protect him forever from mistakes. His first steps into the world of business were not loud, not showy. He did not need to prove that he was rich. What he wanted to prove was that he was worthy. Astor approached business with a different attitude. He did not chase reckless gambles. He did not follow passing frenzies. He observed. He listened. And he learned to understand the rhythm of the market. Real estate became the first field to command his full attention. New York was growing by the day. Streets were expanding. Streams of people poured into the city, carrying dreams of a better life. Astor saw what many had not yet recognized. That land was not just an asset. It was the future, the place where the American dream would converge. He did not simply buy property. He studied how the city was evolving, watched new transit routes take shape, predicted where people would gather in the years to come. Every decision was weighed with care, not emotional, not impulsive. Astor built his wealth the way an architect lays a foundation: slow, solid, and guided by long-term vision. Though born into wealth, he carried a very human fear: the fear of failure, the fear of staining a name his family had protected for generations. That fear made him more disciplined than others. He worked longer hours, spoke less, and kept his distance from flattery. Astor disliked the showmanship of speculators. He avoided conversations filled with boasts of profit. Instead, he chose quiet rooms, occupied only by maps, documents, and cold numbers. Money, to him, was not merely a measure of success. It was a tool for stability, a way to protect his family's position in a rapidly changing society. In those early years, Astor learned an essential lesson. That true power does not come from everyone knowing how rich you are. It comes from quietly controlling the things others depend upon. Each new acquisition did more than increase figures on a ledger. It strengthened his inner confidence that he was not merely living off an inheritance. He was carving out his own path. Yet behind those early successes was a man who remained cautious. Astor rarely celebrated, rarely revealed the emotion of victory. He understood that the marketplace offers no permanent safety. That caution slowed him compared to some, but it also spared him from many traps the market eagerly sets for the overconfident. Those first steps into business did not turn John Jacob Astor IV into a legend overnight. They turned him into a builder of foundations. And from those foundations, a financial empire slowly took shape. Not loud, not dramatic, but resilient and difficult to shake. That was how Astor chose to enter the world of power, not through noise, but through patience. And it was that choice that would define the entire road ahead. Once the foundation was firm enough, John Jacob Astor IV began to expand. Not through reckless leaps, but with a patience rare in an era when everyone wanted to get rich quickly. New York at that time was changing by the day. Low-rise buildings gradually gave way to taller structures. The city was rising, carrying with it the ambitions of those who understood that the future did not belong to today, but to decades ahead. Astor viewed the city as a living organism. He watched how people moved through it, how neighborhoods evolved over time, and how society's needs quietly shifted. Real estate, to Astor, was not simply about buying and selling. It was an art of prediction. Predicting where life would flow, where money would naturally follow. He invested in plots of land many still doubted. Locations considered distant from the center at the time. Yet in Astor's eyes, they were the starting points of the future. Every deal was weighed in silence. No press conferences, no spectacle. Astor let the market speak for him. His empire grew piece by piece. Luxury hotels, rental properties, commercial buildings became inseparable from the rhythm of New York's daily life. Astor understood that true power does not lie in how much cash you possess. It lies in owning the spaces others must enter every single day. Buildings bearing his name did more than generate profit. They created dependence. Businesses needed space. Workers needed places to live. And the city needed investors with enough vision to keep it running. Yet behind the rising numbers stood a man who kept his distance from the world. Astor did not seek admiration. He avoided the spotlight, choosing instead the shadows of closed meeting rooms. He believed that sustainability came from discipline, not from emotion, not from rushed decisions. On long nights, Astor sat alone before maps of the city, lines drawn, areas carefully marked. Each stroke of ink represented a choice carrying immense responsibility. He knew that a single mistake could shake his family's entire legacy. That fear did not paralyze him. It made him cautious to the point of coldness. Astor also expanded into other areas of investment. Industries rising alongside America's growth. Yet in every field, he held to one rule. Only invest in what he could understand and control. His wealth grew with the years, but his personal life changed little. No ostentatious luxury, no reckless spending. Astor seemed to believe that money should work for people, not the other way around. As the empire grew, the distance between him and the rest of society became more pronounced. People knew the name Astor, but few knew the man behind it. He became part of the city's structure, a force inseparable from New York's development. And it was within that silence that the empire of John Jacob Astor IV reached a rare solidity. Not loud, not dramatic, but large enough to shape an entire era. This was the stage at which Astor was no longer merely an heir. He had become a creator. When John Jacob Astor IV stepped out of the world of real estate ledgers and cold numbers, he entered another stage, more dazzling, more refined, yet no less demanding. It was the social world of America's upper class at the end of the 19th century, where every handshake and every invitation to a soiree carried invisible power and unspoken obligations that no one voiced. Yet everyone understood. Astor appeared in New York's grand ballrooms, beneath soft golden lights reflecting off crystal and silk, not merely as a wealthy man, but as the embodiment of a family whose name had been woven into the city's structure of power for generations. Every step he took was observed. Every personal decision could easily become a topic of conversation within high society, where reputation was as valuable as wealth, and sometimes even more fragile. Astor hosted lavish gatherings, attended exclusive clubs, and met politicians, financiers, artists, and intellectuals. He understood that true power did not exist only in towering buildings, but also in relationships built over time, through timely presence, and through the ability to listen to the ambitions of others in spaces that appeared devoted to leisure, yet were in fact places where future agreements quietly took root. Yet behind that glittering surface was a man constantly balancing public image and inner life. Astor carried the pressure of living up to the Astor name, of behaving according to expectation, of succeeding not only for himself, but for an entire legacy. He was drawn more to literature, science, history, and thoughtful conversation than to empty social pleasantries. But high society rarely allowed vulnerability or difference to show too clearly. As a result, Astor's relationships became both a resource and a burden, because the higher he rose, the harder it became to know who approached him out of genuine respect and who came only for the shadow of power behind the Astor name. At the end of long evenings, when the music faded and the guests departed, Astor sometimes confronted a solitude unique to those who stand at the center of every gaze, yet struggle to find true understanding. Social life granted him influence, a voice, and undeniable status, but it also confined him within boundaries where every personal choice could become a public statement. And it was within this intersection of power, glamour, and loneliness that the human portrait of John Jacob Astor IV came into sharper focus. Not merely a wealthy titan, but an individual striving to discover his own identity, caught between society's expectations and the quiet voice within. After the glittering ballrooms and the powerful handshakes, the life of John Jacob Astor IV moved into a more private space, one where money and fame could no longer fully conceal the fragile emotions of a human being. This was the realm of marriage and family, where he sought peace, yet also faced quiet fractures beneath the surface. Astor married at a young age, in a world where upper-class marriages carried social expectations no less heavy than personal affection. The standing of both families, the weight of lineage and public image hovered like invisible pressure, turning every private decision into a collective concern. His first marriage began with hopes of stability and the continuation of the family line. But over time, distance grew between two people shaped by different inner worlds. Astor was consumed by career, projects, and the responsibilities of his family legacy. Home, meanwhile, longed for closer presence, quiet dinners, ordinary moments that Astor rarely had the freedom to give, That absence accumulated into silence. Silence turned into fractures. And fractures ultimately led to separation, an ending that caused not only personal pain, but also waves of gossip within high society, where divorce was still viewed with severity and judgment. After that rupture, Astor entered new relationships with a heart already marked by loss. He found love with a younger woman, someone with whom he felt understanding and a different desire for life beyond old conventions. Yet that very difference ignited public controversy: the age gap, the change in marital choices, the sharp reactions from family and society, all placed Astor at the center of unforgiving judgment. Caught between personal love and family honor, he was forced to choose. And that choice, though rooted in genuine feeling, left deep cuts within his family ties. His children were both pride and quiet remorse to Astor. He wanted to offer them a secure future, yet feared that the weight of the Astor name would press upon their childhood, just as it had upon his own. Family relationships, therefore, were woven from love, responsibility, and a distance difficult to define. And within this private space, John Jacob Astor IV appeared more clearly than ever, not as a titan of wealth, but as a man with deeply human longings, to be loved, to be understood, and to live honestly with his own emotions, even when the price was loneliness at the height of fame. When the stone walls of real estate towers were no longer enough to contain his curiosity, John Jacob Astor IV turned to the wider world beyond them as a way to breathe deeply amid a life of constant pressure. To him, travel was not merely rest. It was a journey of self-affirmation, an opportunity to glimpse a future taking shape beyond the immediate vision of contemporary American society. Astor became captivated by long voyages across the oceans, where each ship carried not only passengers, but also the promise of progress and connection. Standing on deck, watching sails and smokestacks merge with the horizon, he could feel with clarity the pulse of a new era drawing near. Within Astor, a passion for technology grew with every journey. He was fascinated by machinery, by inventions capable of transforming how humans moved, communicated, and existed. Aviation, still a daring dream of humanity at the time, stirred him deeply. In those metal wings, Astor saw more than a means of flight. He saw a symbol of the desire to transcend the limits of fate. He invested. He studied. He spoke with engineers and scientists with an enthusiasm rarely seen in a capitalist already accustomed to profit and power. For ocean liners, Astor held a particular affection. They were where he most vividly sensed the convergence of luxury and engineering, of the art of living and modern science. Larger ships, faster ships, safer ships. To him, they were proof of humanity's faith in progress. Science, in Astor's eyes, was never cold or detached. It was deeply human. Each improvement had the power to shorten distances between people, to ease the loneliness of those far from home, and to open paths to dreams never before imagined. During these journeys, Astor was no longer merely a symbol of immense wealth. He returned, in essence, to being a human being in search of meaning. Standing before the vast ocean or beneath the open sky, his gaze carried both humility and pride. Humility before the immensity of nature, and pride in the belief that human intellect could reach what once seemed impossible. And it was in these moments that John Jacob Astor IV lived most fully, as a traveler of a new age, carrying within him an unwavering faith in the future. The night on the Atlantic was so calm, it felt almost autumnal as the Titanic glided across the glassy surface. John Jacob Astor IV stood on the deck not with the bearing of a billionaire, but like a man listening to the breathing of the night sea. A cold wind brushed his face, carrying a fragile sense of peace. No one aboard could imagine that fate was already moving silently closer. When the collision came, it was not loud like the disasters people later imagined. It was only a gentle shudder, a subtle irregularity that caused confusion more than fear. But for Astor, a man who had faced risk throughout his life, instinct whispered that something irreversible had begun. In the dim light and the growing cold, Astor looked toward his young, pregnant wife. His eyes held no panic. They were deep and steady, as if in that moment he fully understood the value of every remaining second. He took her hand, reassuring her with a calm voice, a calm forged by a lifetime of responsibility and discipline under pressure. When the evacuation order echoed amid the sounds of metal and the creeping water, Astor did not push forward. He did not command. He did not seek privilege. He asked simple questions about safety, about the lifeboats, about the chances of survival for others. And when he learned that women and children were to be given priority, he made his decision without hesitation. He gave up his place for his wife and for those more vulnerable. It was not a moment of theatrical heroism. It was the quiet choice of a man who understood the limits of power in the face of death. As chaos spread, Astor remained on the deck, watching the lifeboats drift away into the darkness of the ocean. There was no bitterness in his gaze, no fear, only the silent acceptance of someone who had lived fully and was now ready to face what no amount of money could ever buy. The Titanic sank, carrying with it the dreams of an era, and a man whose final moments were not marked by grand speeches, but by dignity in silence. And in that silence, John Jacob Astor IV entered history, not merely as the richest man aboard the ship, but as a symbol of a human choice made in the face of destiny. When the sun rose over the Atlantic on the morning after the disaster, the sea no longer held the peaceful beauty of the night before. It carried instead a cold, hollow emptiness, the weight of a loss that could not be named. The Titanic was gone, leaving behind drifting debris and survivors whose eyes held memories that would never fade. For John Jacob Astor IV, death did not arrive in screams or dramatic moments, but in the silence of the deep ocean, where all power, fame, and wealth dissolved as if they had never existed. When news of the catastrophe reached land, America was stunned. Not only because the greatest ship of its age had sunk, but because names once inseparable from dreams of prosperity did not return. Among them, Astor became a symbol of the fragility of wealth. A man who had stood at the pinnacle of society was now spoken of in only 2 words: gone, lost. The public mourned him not merely as a billionaire, but as the image of an era that believed humanity could conquer nature and fate. Memorial services were held in heavy silence, where prayers replaced the confidence that had once ruled. The Astor family faced a double grief: the loss of a son, a husband, a father who would never see his child born, and the shock that shook the image of a powerful dynasty long accustomed to control and permanence. In grand rooms that once echoed with celebrations, there was now only silence and unspoken questions about the cost of ambition and progress. Astor's death, together with the Titanic disaster, forced society to look inward, to confront blind faith in technology and a sense of safety built on pride. The ship had sunk, but its aftershocks spread far beyond the ocean, into maritime law, into how humanity confronts nature, and into the collective memory of an entire generation. For the Astor family, the material legacy remained, but his presence survived only in memory and stories retold. where private grief merged with a shared human tragedy, and where the lesson endured, reminding the world that even the most powerful cannot escape fate when the ocean speaks. After the final waves closed over the traces of the Titanic, the story of John Jacob Astor IV did not end with his death. Instead, it began another journey, quieter, deeper, one that would live on within the memory of America. The legacy Astor left behind cannot be measured solely in money, real estate, or the vast figures written in ledgers. It is measured by the imprint of a man who lived fully in an age that believed in progress and in humanity's own power. Buildings bearing the Astor name still stand along great avenues, reminders of an empire built on ambition, discipline, and long-term vision. His reputation endures in the stories passed down, where he exists both as a symbol of immense wealth and as proof of the fragility of fate. When people speak of Astor, they do not speak only of money. They speak of the responsibility that comes with power, of the question of whether wealth can truly protect a human being from nature and from time. His death aboard the Titanic transformed a billionaire into a cultural symbol, one in which the public could see their own fears and hopes reflected in the spirit of that era. America was forced to ask itself where it was heading, in a race between technology and ethics, between the desire to conquer and the humility required before the natural world. Astor's greatest legacy may not lie in the assets he left behind, but in the question he left for society. What is the true value of success when everything can vanish in a single cold night in the middle of the ocean? As the narrator closes this journey, the image of Astor standing on the deck, gazing out at the sea, is no longer that of the richest man aboard. It is the image of a human being facing the shared destiny of humanity, leaving America with a quiet, sorrowful, and deeply human echo about the limits of power and the ultimate meaning of life.